Anyways, let's move on. Here's an article from EcoWatch about Extinction Rebellion returns to UK streets. After a coronavirus-induced hiatus, the activist group Extinction Rebellion is back on the streets of the UK demanding action on the climate crisis. The group kicked off 10 days of planned civil disobedience on Tuesday with protests in London, Manchester, and Cardiff. The Guardian reported the London protest ended in Parliament Square as the UK's legislative body returned from its summer recess. The government is failing to do what's necessary to keep people safe. We are here taking action because their criminal negligence is putting lives at risk, Extinction Rebellion said on its website. We refuse to be bystanders and wait for this emergency to push beyond the point of no return. Specifically, the group wants Parliament to pass the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, or the CEE. The CEE bill was written by a coalition of scientists, lawyers, activists determined to advance UK climate policy beyond its current goal of reaching a net zero emissions by 2050, which is way too slow. Instead, it would require a climate plan that would reduce emissions enough to account for the UK's fair share of carbon pollution, 2, account for the country's whole carbon footprint, both at home and abroad. Very good. 3, protect nature both in the UK and abroad by looking at the impact of consumer supply chains. I'm liking this list of demands. 4, not rely on new technologies as an excuse to keep polluting at current levels. Excellent. Create a citizens' assembly with bite to shape climate policy. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson defended his government's climate legacy and promised new announcements in the fall. Reuters reported. Before a cabinet meeting, he told senior ministers that he planned a green recovery from the economic toll of the coronavirus pandemic. From this crisis, we will build back better in this country. Is that what he said? That's funny. He just took Joe Biden's slogan, "We will build back faster and we will build back greener," Johnson said. Do you guys believe that? I don't know. There will be a lot more to come about the way in which this government is going to lead a new green industrial revolution in the UK. Interesting that Boris Johnson, though, is saying these things. So you would never, ever, 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 ever hear Donald Trump say these words out of his mouth. The planned disruptions come a little less than a year after XR's autumn uprising shut down large parts of central London and led to more than 1,700 arrests, the Evening Standard reported. This has in turn led to the Metropolitan Police banning the group in London, a move later found to be illegal. All right, let's move on. Also, around the Extinction Rebellion protests, this is from Extinction Rebellion Greenwich, or Greenwich, I don't know how they pronounce that in the UK. Dangerous police tactics against brave rebels who scaled the trees in Parliament Square. Those above 2 meters should not be removed this way, and the Met Police UK know it. So I guess they're removing somebody who was up in the trees. But, Godspeed to Extinction Rebellion for doing something about it. The deep state infiltrates XR. I'm sure that they do, Keith Hayes. Alan Roberts, Bojo is the clown just paying lip service to climate emergency. Yeah. I mean, at least he's, Biden is the clown paying lip service to climate emergency, or not even climate emergency, but to the Green New Deal. And Trump won't even do that. But, at least Bojo will do that. Greenwich, yes. That is the way I understand it to be pronounced. Thank you. Basil Peterson, we never should have come down from the trees. Aha. Cindy Seeley, what's going on? How are you? Let's move on to this interesting tweet. Actually, a retweet from Mike Schellenberger. This guy. If Michael Schellenberger hasn't already proven himself to be, the dunce of the year, he just steps in it again. This guy should never, ever be listened to on any level. He tweets, in fact, poor nations in Africa need to use more, not less plastic, since doing so will improve people's lives, just as plastic has improved people's lives in developed nations for over half a century. All right. If you couldn't be more lost, confused, and deceiving, really. This is along the lines of people, telling me like, oh, the Green New Deal is, really racist or something because people in developing nations need coal and gas and oil because they're developing. Yeah, not so much. Because if they develop like we develop, then we're all dead. If you just don't understand that very simple logic, you don't understand climate change. And you should maybe be quiet and then go research some climate change. But the excuses are going to be, fast and furious, hard and heavy to keep this system going, right? Because, because the poor need it. People in other countries need this system to keep going because they don't have everything that we have, or safety, or blah 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 blah. We must kill the planet because safety, or because standard of living, or because humanitarianism. Jesus effing Christ. So Go Green says, yep, plastic is great for birds, fish, whales, dolphins, animals, rivers, lakes, humans. Do not believe this crap. Right. What about the birds and the fish, the whales, dolphins, animals, rivers, and lakes? Because they need to improve their lives like the humans in Africa. Okay. The humans in Africa do not need more plastic. Please, dear God. Plastic will neither to the humans in America, UK, China, Japan, Australia, Philippines, Indonesia, India, South America. Have I left anybody out? Please let me know. Plastic will soon be irrelevant and unnecessary as alternative to plastic already exists, and even microbes can produce ethylene, a building block for all sorts of plastic. There you go. Logic. God, I want Mike Schellenberger to go away. This ridiculous excuse for somebody with climate information. Mike Schellenberger is a lunatic, and most likely a paid lunatic. Because psychopaths need money too. Let's look at this very, very interesting article. And this article is from 2014. All the way back in 2014. This is from Wired. What's up with that? Building bigger roads actually makes traffic worse, right? Is this along the lines of Jevons paradox? That when you increase efficiency, you just increase the use of energy or whatever it is that you increase the efficiency of, right? But this is a very interesting article. And y'all might understand completely what this is all about. Hold on one second. All right, sorry about that. I grew up in Los Angeles, a city by the freeway, by the sea. And if there's one thing I've ever known since I could sit up in my car seat, it's that you should expect to run into traffic at any point of the day. Yes, commute hours are the worst, but I've run into dead stop bumper-to-bumper cars on the 405 at 2 a.m., as have I. As a kid, I used to ask my parents why they couldn't just build more lanes on the freeway. Maybe transform them all into double-decker highways with cars zooming on the upper and lower levels. Except, as it turns out, that wouldn't work. Because if there's anything that traffic engineers have discovered in the last few decades, it's that you can't build your way out of congestion. It's the roads themselves that cause traffic. The concept is called induced demand, which is economists speak for when increasing the supply of something like roads makes people want that thing even more. Though some traffic engineers made note of this phenomenon at least as early as the 1960s, it is only in recent years that social scientists have collected enough data to show how this happens pretty much every time we build new roads. These findings imply that the ways we traditionally go about trying to mitigate jams are essentially fruitless, and that we'd all be spending a lot less time in traffic if we could just be a little more rational. I'll tell you also why I know this is a thing, because in Los Angeles, we built lots and lots of trains. We built lots and lots of trains, so we actually have something like a working train system in LA. And the traffic is worse than ever. It's worse than it has ever been. And hold on. It is worse than it has ever been. And so, yeah, so all this, mass transit that we've added, it's going to help people get off the roads and, clean up the air. Not at all. Not on any level. So, Jevons paradox at work again. Anyways, let's go back. But before we get to the solutions, we have to take a closer look at the problem. In 2009, two economists, Matthew Turner of the University of Toronto and Giles Duranton of the University of Pennsylvania, decided to compare the amount of new roads and highways built in different U.S. cities between 1980 and 2000 and the total number of miles driven in those cities over the same period. We found that there's this perfect one-to-one relationship, said Turner. If a city had increased its road capacity by 10% between 1980 and 1990, then the amount of driving in that city went up by 10%. If the amount of roads in the same city then went up by 11% between 1990 and 2000, the total number of miles driven also went up by 11%. It's like the two figures were moving in perfect lockstep, changing at the exact same rate. Now, correlation doesn't mean causation, but maybe traffic engineers in U.S. cities happen to know exactly the right amount of roads to build to satisfy driving demand. But Turner and Duranton think that's unlikely. The modern interstate network mostly follows the plan originally conceived by the federal government in 1947, and it seems incredibly coincidental that road engineers at the same time could have successfully predicted driving demand more than half a century in the future. A more likely explanation, Turner and Duranton argue, is what they call the fundamental law of road congestion. New roads will create new drivers, resulting in the intensity of traffic staying the same. Intuitively, I would expect the opposite, that expanding a road network works like replacing a small pipe with a bigger one, allowing the water or cars to flow better. Instead, it's like the larger pipe is drawing more water into itself. The first thing you wonder here is where all these extra drivers are coming from. I mean, are they just popping out of the asphalt as engineers lay down new roads? The answer has to do with what roads allow people to move around. As it turns out, we humans love moving around. If you expand people's ability to travel, they will do it more, living farther away from where they work and therefore being forced to drive into town. Making driving easier also means that people will take more trips in the car than they otherwise would. Finally, businesses that rely on roads will swoop into cities, with many of them bringing trucking and shipments. The problem is that all these things together erode any extra capacity you've built into your street network, meaning traffic levels stay pretty much constant. As long as driving on the road remains easy and cheap, people have an almost unlimited desire to use them. You might think that increasing investment in public transit would ease this mess. Many railway and bus projects are sold on this basis, with politicians promising that traffic will decrease once ridership grows. But the data shows that even in cities that expanded public transit, road congestion stayed exactly the same. Add a new subway line and some drivers will switch to transit, but new drivers replace them. It's the same effect as adding a new lane to a highway. Congestion remains constant. Anyways, I just wanted to read that to you. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I'll take up most of this video reading you this. So the truth is that the concept works in reverse. Certain cities have taken out whole highways, and what happens is you get a decreased flow of cars. So if you want to lessen traffic, you actually have to lessen the roads or lessen the cars. That's, one thing that they missed in this study, or one thing that I guess they didn't really want to talk about is, the fact that, people are allowed to just, buy as many cars as they want, drive as many miles as they want, drive wherever they want, right? So, no one ever when they talk about limiting traffic, they don't talk about actually limiting, the availability of cars to drivers, or the availability of traffic. Like, so what they've done in Paris, yes, Robert Araujo, I like that. What they've done in Paris to alleviate smog and congestion is they will have no car days. They're on every other day. They will limit cars altogether, or in some places they have, based on your license plate number, they'll have odd and even days. So if your license plate ends in a odd number, you can drive, or even number you can drive, right? So, Keith Hayes, yes, indeed. There are other ways to limit traffic besides building more roads, but that's, a succinctly American thing, way to think about it. But I have noticed that they have started to go in the opposite direction, which is limiting traffic on certain roads. Seattle has a traffic-free zone in parts of their cities. They are also doing that in some places in LA, although LA is such a car culture kind of city. Boiled Rope Lamppost, gas is $1 a gallon in Texas. Yes, I know. But it doesn't even really matter how expensive gas is. In California, one of the most expensive states for gasoline. People just drive and drive. I often wondered if gas went up to $6 or $7 a gallon, if people would still buy it. Oh, hell yeah, they would. They would definitely buy it. Of course, the people with money would be able to drive, and the people without money would not be able to drive. But there would be plenty of people buying gas, nonetheless. Keith Hayes, I still do no gas Fridays. Good for you. Good for you. I've been doing no gas Fridays for the last 6 months. It's great. I can't remember the last time I bought gas on a Friday, or even drove on a Friday. I've not driven on many, many Fridays. Succinctly, Raza. How about that? Right. Only poor people would get effed. Anyways, I found that to be an interesting article on, basically the concept of Jevons paradox. So, the answer is limiting. Either limiting the roads, limiting the cars, limiting, people's ability to drive. The answer is limitations. Or taxing when, peak hour driving. Sorry about that. It was weird. My tongue did a weird thing. Osama, number 5. Good quote from George Bernard Shaw. You'll never have a quiet world till you knock the patriotism out of the human race. I love that. I love that quote. Indeed, patriotism is a sickness. An absolute sickness. Here, more on Extinction Rebellion doing their thing. This is from Rupert Reed. So we're blocking vehicular access to Parliament. Extinction Rebellion. This is from yesterday. Scary Times in the Laptev Sea. This is from Zach Labe. The Laptev Sea is essentially ice-free until later this fall. Get a bigger look at this. Here we are all the way at the bottom, below even 2012, if I am not incorrect. I mean, 2012 was all the way down, all the way to zero, pretty much, or almost all the way to zero, and we are there right now, 2020. Feel the heat. There's nothing really more to say about that. We have 103 watching, 49 likes. Please like up the video, guys. Did I miss a super chat in here? I apologize. I see that I got a super chat, but I cannot see it. Anyways, thank you for the super chat, whoever it was. Rich Diana, patriotism is the first refuge of a scoundrel. Or is it the last refuge? Kuro Hikes, the U.S. economy needs to be rearranged to get rid of cars. I could not agree more. Middle class and lower class people can't survive without a car. Gig economy. I could not agree more. Cars need to go. Airplanes need to go. Those are two things that can be done away with immediately. That would have a gigantic impact on emissions. 17%, as seen from earlier this year, exhibited by coronavirus lockdowns. Alan Roberts says patriotism is standard default of an idiot. I couldn't say it any better. Let's move on. Well, this is a recent article about something that we all know, but let's review. The dirty secrets of clean electric vehicles. This is from Tilak Doshi from August 2nd, 2020. I analyze energy, economics, and related public policy issues. The widespread view that fossil fuels are dirty and renewables such as wind and solar energy and electric vehicles are quote-unquote clean has become a fixture of mainstream media and policy assumptions across the political spectrum in developed countries, perhaps with the exception of the Trump-led U.S. administration. Indeed, the ultimate question we are led to believe is how quickly can enlightened Western governments, led by an alleged scientific consensus, decarbonize with clean energy in a race to save the world from impending climate catastrophe. The net zero by 2050 mantra calling for carbon emissions to be completely mitigated within 3 decades is now the clarion call by governments and intergovernmental agencies around the developed world, ranging from several EU member states in the UK to the International Energy Agency and the International Monetary Fund. Mining out of sight, out of mind. Let's start with Elon Musk's Tesla. In an astonishing achievement for a company that has now posted 4 consecutive quarters of profits, Tesla is now the world's most valuable automotive company. Demand for EVs is set to soar as government policies subsidize the purchase of EVs to replace the internal combustion engine of gasoline and diesel-driven cars, and as owning a clean and green car becomes a moral testament to many a virtue-signaling customer. Yet, if one looks under the hood of clean energy, battery-driven EVs, the dirt found would surprise most. The most important component in the EV is the lithium-ion rechargeable battery, which relies on critical mineral commodities such as cobalt, graphite, lithium, and manganese. Tracing the source of these minerals in what is called Fuel cycle economics, it becomes apparent that EVs create a trail of dirt from the mining and processing of minerals upstream. A recent United Nations report warns that the raw materials used in an electric car battery are highly concentrated in a small number of countries where environmental and labor regulations are weak or non-existent. Thus, battery production for EVs is driving a boom in small-scale or artisanal cobalt production in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which supplies 2/3 of the global output of the mineral. These artisanal mines, which account for up to a quarter of the country's production, have been found to be dangerous and employ child labor. Mindful of what the image of child scrabbling for hand-dug minerals in Africa can do to high-tech's clean and green image, most tech and auto companies using cobalt and other toxic heavy metals avoid direct sourcing from mines. Tesla Inc. struck a deal last month with Swiss-based Glencore plc to buy as much as 6,000 tons of cobalt annually from the latter's Congolese mines. While Tesla has said it aims to remove reputational risks associated with sourcing minerals from countries such as the DRC where corruption is rampant, Glencore assures buyers that no hand-dug cobalt is treated at its mechanized mines. There are 7.2 million battery EVs, or about 1% of the total vehicle fleet today. To get an idea of the scale of mining for raw materials involved in replacing the world's gasoline and diesel-fueled cars with EVs, we can take the example of the UK vehicle fleet with EVs. Assuming they use the most resource-frugal next-generation batteries, we would need the following materials: about twice the annual global production of cobalt, 3/4 of the world's production lithium carbonate, nearly the entire world production of neodymium, and more than half of the world's production of copper in 2018. And this is just for the UK. Professor Kelly estimates that if we want the whole world to be transported by electric vehicles, the vast increases in the supply of the raw materials listed above would go far beyond known reserves. The environmental and social impact of vastly expanded mineral for the mining for these materials, some of which are highly toxic when mined, transported, and processed in countries afflicted by corruption and poor human rights records, can only be imagined. The clean and green image of EVs stands in stark contrast to the realities of manufacturing batteries. Zero emissions and all that. Proponents of EVs might counter by saying that despite these evident environmental and social problems associated with mining in many third world countries, the case remains that EVs help reduce carbon dioxide emissions associated with the internal combustion engine run on gasoline and diesel fuels. According to the reigning climate change narrative, it is, after all, carbon dioxide emissions that are threatening environmental catastrophe on a global scale. For the sake of saving the world, the climate crusaders, I mean, this guy sounds like he's a bit of a, climate skeptic or denier, or maybe he doesn't like climate change people. The climate crusaders of the richer nations might be willing to ignore the local pollution and human rights violations involved in mining for minerals and rare earths in Africa, China, Latin America, and elsewhere. While one might question the inherent inequity in imposing such a trade-off, the supposed advantages of EVs in emitting lower carbon emissions are overstated according to a peer-reviewed life cycle study comparing conventional electric vehicles. To begin with, about half of the lifetime carbon dioxide emissions from an electric car come from the energy used to produce the car, especially in the mining and processing of raw materials needed for the battery. This compares unfavorably with the manufacture of a gasoline-powered car, which accounts for 17% of the car's lifetime carbon dioxide emissions. When a new EV appears in the showroom, it has already caused 30,000 pounds of carbon dioxide emission. The equivalent amount for manufacturing a conventional car is 14,000 pounds. Once on the road, the carbon dioxide emissions of EVs depends on the power generation fuel used to recharge its batteries. If it comes mostly from coal-fired power plants, it will lead to about 15 ounces of carbon dioxide for every mile it is driven, 3 ounces more than a similar gasoline-powered car. Even without reference to the source of electricity used for battery charging, if an EV is driven 50,000 miles over its lifetime, the huge initial emissions from its manufacturer means the EV will actually have put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than a similar size gasoline-powered car driven the same number of miles, even if the EV is driven for 90,000 miles and the battery is charged by cleaner natural gas-fueled power stations. It will cause just 24% less carbon dioxide emissions than a gasoline-powered car. As the skeptical environmentalist Bjorn Lomborg puts it, this is a far cry from zero emissions. Excuse me. As most ordinary people mindful of keeping within modest budgets choose affordable gasoline or diesel-powered cars, experts and policy advisors the world over have felt compelled to tilt the playing field in favor of EVs. EV subsidies are regressive given their high upfront costs. EVs are only affordable for high-income households. It is egregious that EV subsidies are funded. I don't know about egregious. Are funded by the average taxpayer so that the rich can buy their EVs at subsidized prices. All right, that is actually I call bullshit on that statement. Straight up bullshit. I would rather that EVs are subsidized. Period. Saying that subsidies go on to the taxpayer again. Everything that is good for people that, economists don't like, say that it's, the taxpayers who are paying for it. But when you print money for, the military industrial complex or whatever, or, aid packages to other countries, right? They never say it's like coming from the taxpayers. They're just printing the money. So let's stop with the whole taxpayers are footing the bill for this. The taxpayers also footed the bill for subsidies for car owners back in the 2000s when Bush was president. SUV purchases were subsidized by the Bush administration. You got $1,000 or $2,000 back for buying a SUV, which was actually a subsidy for fossil fuel and the fossil fuel industry, right? Because SUVs use a shit ton of gasoline. So, basically, the government was funding, increased emissions and increased gasoline use, and all of this, supposedly was coming out of the taxpayer, which is, of course, again, bullshit. But I would rather that EVs be subsidized than fossil fuel-driven vehicles, right? Maybe if you're a libertarian of libertarian-minded thought process, you would say there should be no subsidies whatsoever. That it should be, the free market dictating who buys whatever. I don't care. I would rather the EVs or hybrids were subsidized. But again, he's making a good point about the emissions that come with the upfront construction of the cars. Again, if we replace the entire fleet of cars in the United States, imagine the planetary destruction that would be necessary to do that. Mark Cranfield, EVs will not save us, indeed. Right. Poppy Davis, taxpayers are footing the bill for all the interest on that printed debt. Right. Right. John D. We need to keep... So this is a very good point. John D., I really like this point. We need to keep 90% of transport in the ground. Any EV vehicle should be rental only or, public transit or mass transit, right? So imagine if, car ownership was outlawed. That should be, how about proposing that for a Green New Deal? Let's say car ownership is outlawed, and you have maybe one or two vehicles in your community or in your neighborhood or on your block, right? And people have to take turns using this vehicle or renting this vehicle, right? You have a few vehicles out there that people can rent. You drive obviously at that point, there's not a free market for automobiles, right? So the auto industry is nationalized. The government is taking over the construction of automobiles. They're only supplying, a certain number of automobiles, and people have to figure out how they're going to use them. That would be a way to greatly reduce emissions very, very quickly and not destroy if all those vehicles were electric vehicles, that would be great. Hey guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and you can support the channel at the links below, PayPal, Patreon, Square. Also, if you'd like to watch the live streams, you can watch the live streams on my Patreon channel. You can subscribe for as little as $1. So hopefully I will see you over there, and thanks so much.